Unholy threats of destruction aimed at North Korea's main enemies on Thursday, as Pyongyang vowed to use nuclear weapons to reduce the US to ashes and darkness, sink Japan, and wipe out South Korea with fire after the countries backed the latest round of international sanctions against the regime. The UN didn't make it out unscathed either, state media branding it a tool of evil made up of what it calls money-bribed countries that move at the order of the United States. Japan has been the first nation to hit back hard.
This announcement is extremely provocative and outrageous and raises the tension in the region. It is unacceptable.
Also getting North Korea fired up this week, military drills in the south preparing for what would happen if Pyongyang followed through with a nuclear launch. The Air Force holding the first ever live fire test of its Taurus missile with pinpoint accuracy. Images like these only fueling Pyongyang's paranoia that its neighbours are preparing for war.
You're watching Reuters TV. Here are your top stories.
A man is stabbed in Jerusalem as more protests erupt. The UK's Johnson lobbies for an aid worker jailed in Iran.
Buckle up. The Bitcoin roller coaster ride is about to get even wilder.
This is Reuters Now.
A Palestinian man stabbed an Israeli security guard at a bus station on Sunday, leaving him in a critical condition. The incident took place in Jerusalem, which Donald Trump declared Israel's capital last week, sparking furious protests throughout the Arab and Muslim world. Violence also flared at a demonstration outside the US Embassy in Lebanon. Security forces fired water cannon and tear gas as US and Israeli flags burned. In the Israeli-occupied West Bank, Palestinians threw stones at troops who responded with tear gas. In Gaza, fury erupted for the fourth day running. 2 Palestinian gunmen were killed by Israeli airstrikes on the enclave on Saturday, after Hamas, which controls the Strip, fired rockets into southern Israel. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas now plans to snub the US Vice President, an official said. He was scheduled to meet Mike Pence when he visits the region this month. In Indonesia, home to the world's largest Muslim population, thousands showed their solidarity, many waving banners saying Palestine is in our hearts. Arab leaders urging the United States to abandon its decision, saying it would spur further violence throughout the volatile region. Western leaders too say it is a blow to peace efforts, while the de facto leader of the United Arab Emirates warned it threw a lifebuoy to, quote, terrorists who were otherwise losing ground. Iraq's Prime Minister celebrating on Saturday, saying Iraqi forces had driven the last remnants of Islamic State out of the country. Haider al-Abadi saying troops had purged the remaining members of the militant group, 3 years after they captured around a third of Iraq's territory. Al-Abadi saying forces had recaptured the last areas still under IS control along the border with Syria. Mosul, the group's de facto capital in Iraq, fell in July after a grueling 9-month campaign backed by a US-led coalition that saw much of the northern Iraqi city destroyed. And then last month, Iraqi forces captured Rawa, the last remaining town under Islamic State control near that border. Islamic State's Syrian capital Raqqa also fell to a US-backed Kurdish-led coalition in September. The forces fighting Islamic State in both countries say they now expect a new phase of guerrilla warfare, typical to the group. The British Foreign Secretary making a last-ditch attempt in Iran on Sunday to negotiate the release of a jailed British-Iranian aid worker. Boris Johnson held almost an hour of talks with the country's president, Hassan Rouhani, after flying to Tehran to seek Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe's freedom. Britain says the former Thomson Reuters Charity Foundation worker, which is separate to Reuters News, was visiting family on holiday when she was jailed by Iran for attempting to overthrow the government. The case has taken on domestic political importance after Johnson said last month that Zaghari-Ratcliffe trained journalists, which her employer denies. Johnson later apologised. Opponents have called for him to resign if his comments lead to her serving longer in prison. Bilateral relations and nuclear issues were discussed too. International sanctions against Iran have only recently been lifted as part of a 2015 deal to curb Tehran's disputed uranium enrichment program. That deal is under threat after US President Donald Trump decided to decertify Iran's compliance with its terms. Zaghari Ratcliffe's case is hugely important for diplomatic relations then, with Johnson vowing to leave no stone unturned in Britain's efforts to free her.
For the cotton farmers of Burkina Faso, genetically modified crops are, for now, a thing of the past. This season, Africa's top cotton-producing country returned to conventional crops after an 8-year GM partnership with US agrochemical giant Monsanto failed.
Honestly, genetically modified cotton, it's not good today. It's not good tomorrow.
It's a case that highlights a little-known challenge for genetic engineering: how to fit big technology to the needs of local farmers. Cotton is Burkina Faso's second biggest export, involving a fifth of the total workforce. So in 2000, after seeing their crops ravaged by the bollworm, they were desperate. A solution came from Monsanto, a pest-resistant cotton strain which had been introduced in the US and was being marketed worldwide. For Monsanto, it was a chance to showcase their technology in West Africa. The seeds were introduced in 2008, the resulting cotton was pest-free and more abundant. But there was a problem. Burkina Faso is a small player on the global cotton stage, but what it lacks in quantity, it makes up for in quality. And that's determined by the length of fibres. By the 2014 to 2015 season, the GM cotton fibres were an average 2.29 millimetres shorter. And that meant Burkina cotton lost its premium pricing. In December 2016, the Burkina-Monsanto partnership ended with a settlement. Monsanto wrote off $19 million it was owed in exchange for Burkinabe farmers dropping demands for compensation. Monsanto, whose $13.5 billion revenues in 2016 were more than Burkina Faso's GDP, told Reuters its genetic traits had transformed the country's cotton sector, improving the lives of 350,000 farmers and some 4 million local people. But for now, the cotton sector has gone back to the old ways. In its first season without GM seeds, almost 99% of its production was graded as the high-quality medium or long staple. And so far, the bollworm has not returned.
How do you think people should assess the accusers of the president?
Well, I mean, the same thing as women who accuse anyone should be heard. They should be heard and they should be dealt with. And I think we heard from them prior to the election. And I think any woman who has felt violated or felt mistreated in any way, they have every right to speak up.
And does the election mean that's a settled issue?
That's for the people to decide. I know that he was elected, but, women should always feel comfortable coming forward, and we should all be willing to listen to them.
I'm going to take Alabama values to Washington.
As the nation shifts its attention south ahead of this week's Senate special election in Alabama, the state's senior senator Richard Shelby on Sunday said he did not vote for his party's candidate, Roy Moore. In an interview on CNN's State of the Union, Shelby said, quote, "I think the Republican Party can do better," citing the accusations that Moore sexually assaulted or behaved inappropriately with several women when they were teenagers and he was in his 30s. Moore, a conservative Christian and former state judge, denies the allegations. Shelby said he already voted and cast a write-in ballot for a different Republican he declined to name. Last week, President Trump formally endorsed Moore and on Friday voiced his support for the Republican candidate during a rally in Pensacola, Florida.
Get out and vote for Roy Moore.
Moore faces Democratic candidate Doug Jones in Tuesday's special election. A recent Jones campaign ad featured similar comments Senator Shelby made in November.
But to write in some distinguished person's name.
The start of another chilly winter amid smog-choked skies is prompting China to take action. This year, Beijing has ordered many factories to curb or completely stop production and telling millions of people in the north to use gas heating, not coal, all in a bid to cut pollution. But that energy gamble isn't working. Heating costs are soaring as natural gas supplies dwindle. As Reuters' David Stanway reports from Shanghai, the government is now actively looking at nuclear power as an alternative.
So the nuclear firms are saying, look, we have an available solution here. Why not build a district heating reactor that can provide clean, zero-emission heating to 200,000 households per unit? At the moment, what the nuclear power firms are saying that they can just plug in these heating reactors directly into the heating system. So basically, they will be plugged into an existing urban residential heating system that pumps steam throughout thousands of households.
China's state-owned nuclear sector is convinced this is the answer, but the government still faces problems.
The fixed costs, the investment costs of building these reactors is going to be pretty high. It's going to be 1.5 billion renminbi per unit. The other issue is going to be public acceptance, and the government have acknowledged that this is a really serious challenge, not just for these heating reactors, but for all kinds of nuclear projects. The people just don't trust this technology at the moment.
China is already pumping billions of yuan into nuclear expansion. But for the people living through an icy beginning to winter, these heating reactors won't be a quick fix. Experts say it will take at least 5 years for each project to be tested, approved and installed.
It was the first UN visit to North Korea in years. Political Affairs Chief Jeffrey Feltman returning from his 4-day trip to Pyongyang on Saturday, where state media says he expressed willingness to ease tension on the Korean peninsula. It also said the UN envoy acknowledged the negative impact of sanctions on humanitarian aid to the country. Feltman's the highest level UN official to visit North Korea since 2012. Footage released by state media shows him touring hospitals in Pyongyang, as well as inspecting a food factory in the capital. His trip was set against the backdrop of military drills by Washington and Seoul over the Korean peninsula, which the North calls a prelude to nuclear war. North Korea regularly threatens to destroy South Korea and the US, saying its weapons programs are necessary to counter American aggression.
By the time you've finished watching this story, Bitcoin may have rallied by thousands of dollars or plummeted by similar amounts. Such is the nature of its hyper-volatility. It briefly soared through the $17,000 mark on Friday before dropping back around $15,000. Still up more than 70% for the week, more than tenfold this year. That leaving traders and investors debating whether it's a bubble that's about to burst. Many big investors have been reluctant to pile into the cryptocurrency market unless it's regulated. But some analysts say the recent surges are down to the upcoming launch of the first Bitcoin futures market, which could provide long-awaited legitimacy. The CEO of the newly formed London Block Exchange, which aims to launch a sterling to cryptocurrency exchange, says the stricter trading environment may indeed ease fears.
I think what the futures market brings is a place for hedge funds and institutional money to hedge their positions. So we believe that it'll drive stability, and certainly in the markets that they choose to list.
But if the last 3 months are to go by, the only thing certain is uncertainty.
I think we are due a correction, and I suspect the correction will happen when the futures markets come online. And so my suggestion is to kind of wait and see what happens. I think that if you're investing though for the next 2 years or 3 years, then the difference between the price now and the price in a week's time may be irrelevant.
Bitcoin futures will launch on the Chicago-based CBOE Futures Exchange on Sunday. The world's largest futures exchange, CME, will begin its Bitcoin offering a week later.
You're up to date. Check back later as stories develop.